Okay, great. So let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar talking about the new future for transatlantic cooperation under the new Biden administration. My name is Célia Ramstein, and I'm the coordinator for the Green Party, the French Green Party in DC. And I'm delighted to be here with Dominic Englert from the German Green Party in DC. And it's at least the second time we're collaborating for some events, but this is our first joint webinar. So we're very excited to be able to bring you amazing panelists that Dominic will present in a second in a joint effort to discuss about the relationship between the US and Europe. As you all know, the Green Party is both in France, in Germany, and around the world, has always been a strong supporter of transatlantic cooperation, international cooperation, and of course, of the European Union and European collaboration. So it's really a theme that's very close to our heart. It is a very broad theme, so we'll have to select a few topics. So we've tried to identify some of topics of interest for the discussion, and of course we'll leave plenty of time for the Q&A at the end for you to ask your own questions. Let me just conclude this very short introduction by reminding at least the French audience that this webinar for us is also organizing as part of a series of webinars that we're organizing all over, actually all over the world, but also more specifically in North America, in the lead up to the élections consulaires, which are small elections, local elections for French people living abroad. And we'll have lists all over North America, in the Midwest. If there are people from Midwest, we'll share information on where you can find more details on our green list there, but we'll also have a representative in New York, Montreal, Miami, San Francisco. So wherever you are, there is probably a green list you can vote for. And of course, in DC, there will be one. So let us know if you're interested. I'll share in the chat how you can reach out. But I just wanted to make sure to mention that, because if you're French people living abroad, you can vote. You just need to register before the end of April. So happy to send more details on that for anyone who is interested. But for now, I'll hand over to Dominic to get us started. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you very much, Celine. And before I take over, I would just like to invite you to quickly present the French party in Washington, D.C. Maybe just a few words from your side, what you're doing there, and what your mission is being abroad and promoting the goals of the French Green Party across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite different what we do now versus what we used to do. So we used to have meetings, we used to have, some gathering, happy hours, invite speakers, discuss on one topic, or do some activities together. We're a small group of passionate people who care about the environment and French politics and also US politics. So usually we have lively discussion with like-minded people who want to push forward the climate agenda, the environmental agenda, the social agenda. It really depends what everyone is passionate about. But these days we're doing most of that online. So, I mean, you all know the Zoom happy hours and so on. So for now, that's what we're doing. But that's why I'm excited to do this webinar. At least it's kind of a change from our usual activities. But if you're interested, do reach out, and I'm happy to add you to the mailing list so that we can have you for our future event, hopefully in person.
Thank you very much. That's great. And actually, it's not much different for the German Green Party. As you can see on these photos, we used to be quite active, physically active, also on the streets, really in terms of activism. I would call these the good old times that will hopefully return very soon again. Here, for example, we participated in the People's Climate March. We also joined the Fridays for Future protests in front of the Congress. But what we also used to do on a frequent basis were these so-called green sofa talks. These green sofa talks are kind of our signature events. Whenever a green politician came and visited Washington, D.C., either for professional or for private reasons, we seized this opportunity to invite him or her to friendly chat. Fireside chat was not always a fire next to us, but we invite them to one of our homes. We make sure that everybody is comfortable in terms of food and drinks. As you can see on the photo, drinks are also very important at these events. And then we engage in very often very exciting and intriguing conversation, because it's on a very intimate level where the politicians open up also as kind of normal human beings, and we always enjoy this. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, it has become a little bit trickier, but we've turned this kind of challenge into an advantage by inviting now virtually politicians that haven't made their way to Washington, D.C. yet, or are unlikely to make their way to Washington, D.C. because simply their focus areas is maybe in the Middle East, or is in Asia, or on Africa. So within this context, we are trying to connect with them and invite them to our virtual green sofas. We are a group of 50 members in Washington, D.C., most of them in Washington, D.C., but many people also across the United States, and some of our veterans also in Germany and across the world. But we also engage with a network of, I think on our mailing list, there are about 300, 400 people that we call Green Friends, and that we regularly invite now, especially to our virtual events. But that much about us. Now I would like to focus on the highlights, on the kind of the protagonists of today's session. And let me first introduce Célia Belin. We are very happy that we could secure her and that she has positively responded to our invitation, because she is clearly one of the leading experts on transatlantic cooperation, from applying both a French perspective and a US-American perspective. Currently, she is a visiting fellow in the Center on the United States and Europe at Brookings Institution. And there she really focuses, as I've already said, on the transatlantic relations, on US foreign policy towards Europe, and on French policy, French politics, especially French policy. Before she came to Washington, D.C. to work at Brookings, she served for over 5 years as an advisor on US-American affairs and transatlantic relations in the French Foreign Ministry, where she was also the chief editor of a flagship publication called Les Carnets du CAPS. CAPS is Centre d'analyse de prévision et de stratégie. She taught at University Paris II, and was a guest fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, and a visiting scholar in the Middle East Institute at Columbia University. And she has also a PhD in political science from the University Paris II, and wrote her dissertation on a very intriguing topic. It's on the evangelical pro-Israel lobby in the United States. So that's not necessarily the focus of today's topic, but I'm sure that she can also draw a lot of exciting conclusions from that research work. Having talked about Célia, I would also like to introduce another renowned expert from the German side on transatlantic cooperation, Miss Laura von Daniels. Laura is the head of the research division, The Americas, at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. For the German speakers, or the Germans among us, better known as the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, SWP, SWP, that where experts regularly show up on all main German media outlets. Laura's expertise is focused especially on the international finance system, on the financial and debt crisis in general, and on foreign trade policy, very often with a specific focus on the United States. Before working for the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, she was a visiting assistant professor at the Central European University in Budapest, and also spent a year at Harvard University in Cambridge. Laura has a PhD from the Free University Berlin, and published her thesis on fiscal decentralization and budget control. But this is a lot of information that is very important to know. But I think that Célia and Laura have got very personal and very interesting recent research findings to share with us that really apply to today's topic, where we would like to focus on the question whether this new era in US-American politics represents a new momentum for transatlantic cooperation between the United States and Europe. And I would like to give the floor now to Célia. Célia, maybe you can start, and maybe you can share with us a few personal thoughts on the recent developments with regard to the relationship between the United States and Europe. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominique, and for this great presentation. I'm very honored to be here. I'm happy to join. Thank you, Celine, for the invitation as well. We're sorry, of course, that this cannot be in person and that we cannot enjoy the green sofa and the drinks and all of the other opportunities that in person used to provide to us. But I'm glad we are able to have this conversation with Laura as well, who sits very far from us right now, but who this way we can have this great event and conversation in this new virtual environment. So you ask a very important question right now. What is the momentum for transatlantic cooperation? But to put it very simply, are we friends again? Can we even be friends again with the United States? And I'm saying, I'm posing this question, and there's an underlying, were we not friends anymore? What has happened in the past 4 years? I think we are just at a moment, such a major turning point in American foreign policy, in transatlantic relations, that a lot of these very basic questions are put on the table. And the first reaction, the first element that I want to bring is the fact that on part of the new American administration, it's very clear, as Joe Biden said it on his inauguration speech, America is back. He said diplomacy is back. And is the entire idea behind this simple sentence is that the new administration has taken into account the evolution of America's image, America's role in the world, America's standing in the world, and America's relationship with alliances that has evolved in the 4 years of Donald Trump. Mainly because the previous administration had an America first foreign policy, which considered every ally and partner and rival as simply competitors on every front, whether it was economic, security, or any other domain. America first was very often America alone. And this fact has made for a very tense relationship between Europe and the US, and fraught relationship. And when Joe Biden proclaims America is back, he's also trying to restore America's credibility, America's alliances, and America and the US's moral leadership in the world. On the other side, what about Europeans? How do they approach this sort of renew, at least display of renewing European transatlantic relations? Well, Europeans first and foremost are relieved that America is back. They considered that it meant, Joe Biden's election meant the return of a constructive and engaged partner. You have to remember that one of the main elements of criticism that I've heard is not only that the European Union in particular was treated as a foe, as an adversary by the Trump administration, is also that the concentration of power and the power of decision in the White House, in the hands of the president only made for a very unpredictable and very chaotic policy making process. And in particular, European partners that were very engaged with their American partners on, for example, military theaters like the French in the Sahel, or working together on trade and economic fronts, were always taken aback by the fact that the decisions that were given by the administration could be entirely reversed if the president was to decide something entirely different. And sometimes those decisions would come in the form of a tweet from one day to another. I have had a few interactions with diplomat friends who have complained to me repeatedly that, the day before they took a delegation of parliamentarians on Capitol Hill, or in the Pentagon, or in the State Department, where they have been given assurances on a certain set of priorities on Iran, on North Korea, on trade, and just to see the day later this policy entirely reversed. So I think this element of chaos that has, it was very much under the radar and not necessarily covered by the media, but Europeans' diplomatic corps know that, the main result of the election of a new administration and a new team will probably mean a stronger, more constructive, more engaged partner sitting finally not only in the White House, but in all the other departments of the administration, and therefore a much stronger basis for collaboration. And the second element is that, of course, there's a lot of cooperation and collaboration needed from the sheer amount of the international tasks that lay ahead of the transatlantic partner. This year in particular, you've had the massive COVID crisis with the vaccine rollout that needs to be successful, not only within our own national countries, but basically having a successful vaccine rollout for the entire world. Because when the virus sits anywhere in the world, it could come back as a boomerang. And it's also a matter of equity. It is also, I must say, a matter of influence. A lot of European leaders have noticed, so Emmanuel Macron talked about it in a recent event at the Atlantic Council. Angela Merkel talked about it during the Munich Security Conference. Both of them underlined the fact that China's vaccine diplomacy has been quite successful, that they are the one providing a successful vaccine rollout for many countries, in particular in Africa. And the fact of having Western-led multilateral organization failing at helping those countries overcome the COVID crisis and providing some strong relief is implying a diminishment of Western influence very rapidly on the world stage. So that's why both European leaders talked about a result-oriented multilateralism. It's important that all these organizations that the transatlantic partners have built together and powered together provide relief to the entire world if the transatlantic relation has to matter again. Other pressing international tasks, it's of course climate, it's of course technology disruptions around the world, it's of course the rise of great powers. Is not even the rise anymore, but it's the influence of great powers such as Russia and China. And I will just make a last point and then give the floor to Laura, because I think it would be more interesting to open it up to question. So once again, America is back. Europeans are rejoicing that America is back. But we must remember there is no return to normal, to a previous, pre-Trump sort of dream era of transatlantic relations. First, there was never a dream era of transatlantic relations, but there is no return to pre-Trump ante possible in the world. Why? Because too many elements of international life has changed. It's not only about the rise of revisionist powers. It's not only about a weakened multilateral system, but it's also the fact that Europeans have themselves understood that they need a little bit more in autonomy and a little bit more capacity to decide for themselves. So this has a lot to do with the conversation on strategic autonomy for Europe, or in the German context, European sovereignty. In any way, it's a conversation on the fact that European partners need to find a way to be able to determine the outcome they want to see happen on the international stage, and to be capable of providing those outcomes. And this conversation has, of course, been accelerated by the 4 years of Trump, but it's something that I doubt that we will see a reverse, basically. The second element that allows us to think that there's no return to a pre-Trump era is the fact that the US itself has changed. Right now, the United States is entirely focused inwardly. It's facing a very strong social economic crisis, of course, a health crisis, but also a racial crisis. There's so much ahead in terms of task on the domestic front that there's very little willingness to just re-engage fully. There's a hope that a partnership with Europeans will allow them to somehow stabilize some of the most pressing security issues, mainly in the Middle East, in the neighborhood of Europe, so as to focus almost entirely on the China challenge. But at the heart of the foreign policy that's been developing in the Biden administration, there's one expression. It's foreign policy for the middle class. And what does it mean? It means that whatever the US will do in terms of foreign policy, in terms of international influence, it has to reap benefit for the American middle class. So basically the priority is domestic. Everything else rolls out from this domestic point of view. And last point, Europeans know there is no return to a pre-Trump era just from the fact that Donald Trump himself could come back. Or maybe not Donald Trump, but Trumpism could come back. We've all been surprised, I must say, even though a lot of people have had envisioned that Donald Trump could be re-elected, but it's been quite powerful to realize that Donald Trump had increased his share of voters from 2016 to 2020. So even though Joe Biden won by 7 million votes, the sheer amount of people who was willing to vote again for Donald Trump had increased, and it's a very strong, ideologically driven, powerful movement based on populism and nationalism and a rejection also of a certain part of democratic politics. And this element, this looming possibility of having a return to Trumpism, which also has been confirmed by the impeachment process, where Donald Trump was able to be acquitted for the second time. This creates an enormous amount of unpredictability in the sustainability of American foreign policy. And so European partners know that whatever they engage in with the United States better be either reaping benefit on the short-term basis, basically what can we do in the next 4 years, or be sustainable enough, be resilient enough so as to survive another 4 years of America First, or to be adapted to another 4 years of America First, which could come back as early as 2024. I'll stop there. Happy to go back on any of these points more precisely.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Célia, for sharing these perspectives. My key takeaway is that really that we have two friends here, where one of them 4 years ago decided to step outside the door and stayed away for a while, is now coming back. There's an agreement to be friends again, but these friends may have changed in the meantime. They may not be the same ones again in terms of character, personality, and they will closely watch each other, especially, or should closely watch each other, especially from the European side, seeing kind of, okay, let's be friends again, but I don't take this friendship for granted anymore, and I'm gonna judge you on what you are doing and not on what you are saying. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for this. Laura, do you see this similarly? Do we have is the friendship back, but the love may but the love and the trust maybe not yet?
Definitely, I think trust and building trust is the defining theme for the Biden presidency. There's one interesting point among there were many interesting points, obviously, but about what Célia said in her last remarks was that within Europe, there's an awareness that one has to be adaptive and prepare, so to speak, for a situation where Trump or Trumpism or America Firstism comes back, right? So I would disagree at this point. I would say Germans are not prepared. Somehow, I think as a people, we might be more naive, or at least diplomatically or politically more naive. I think people here are, on average, very happy to see Joe Biden in office, and it's the general sense that, you know, everything's good now and it will remain that way forever. But we'll see. We have to see what happens in 2 and in 4 years. But first of all, let me thank you for the invitation and also the very nice introductory remarks, both of you, Celine and Dominic, and also Célia for her very interesting points. And I will try my best to level with that in some introductory remarks. Since you were asking us to talk about the question whether there's a new momentum for transatlantic cooperation, I thought I'd start with giving the answer right away. I would say yes, but that's not enough, obviously. We have to give some arguments why this should be the case. I think there are 3 points that one could make. For starters, if you look at the collection of strategic policy outlines, opinion pieces by members of the Biden administration, and even congressional statements that we hear now, and first official documents of this new administration, you see that they have strategic goals that are something very positive from a European perspective. It's something we'd like to hear. And you know, if you look at it empirically, as a political scientist, I have to say that campaign statements and campaign platforms are usually the best predictor we have of what policy actually turns out in the end. It's not a perfect predictor, but that's the best we can work with. And I think in the US system, it's pretty much finding a strong correlation between campaign platform and what presidents actually implement as a policy. Not always, but to a large extent. So if we take Joe Biden by what he stated and all of his political statements on working together, improving multilateral institutions, working together with allies, and addressing a whole lot of very urgent topics like the pandemic, fighting the pandemic, working together towards better climate policy, also working on issues like non-proliferation, and of course on very urgent crises like we see in countries like in Iran and other places like Afghanistan and so on. If we take this predictor, what he said about it, what his people say about it, I think it's a good start. And it very much overlaps with a European policy agenda. So that's one thing. Then the second good reason why this might be actually a new momentum for transatlantic cooperation. As they say, personnel is politics. And what we see from looking at the dramatis personae of the Biden administration, the key players, to the extent that we know them already and that they are actually in office by now. This is also a very positive sign, I would say. I will focus on the actors working on trade, economic and climate policy. I think Célia can say much better things about people in the defense and foreign policy domain. But if I look at the people that were chosen, someone like Catherine Tai for the US Trade Representative Office, Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, Janet Yellen, of course, as Treasury, John Kerry, but also Gina McCarthy, who as a couple are supposed to work on climate policy. And then others, I mean, even among the councillors, the economic councillors, if you take a person like Célia Rouse, who will be heading the Council of Economic Advisors, that's a great lineup of people. And it should be possible from a European perspective to work with these people because they're rational people. Their work is science-based. They believe in cooperation as a political method. So that's a great point to start from. And then the third reason, we see a variety of topics on the political agenda that could best be worked on together. I give you a German perspective, so mind the hierarchy or the priority list, perhaps. I would say if we talk about COVID-19 fighting the pandemic globally through the COVAX initiative, for instance, there's a huge overlap of interest. Then climate policy, the Green New Deal in Europe, and then Joe Biden's plans for improved climate policy. There's a lot of congruence. It's not a perfect match, but we might get to something like that. Then, as I already mentioned, non-proliferation, Iran, Germany at this point is very positive, optimistic about finding a way towards either the US entering the existing JCPOA agreement or coming up with an entirely new approach to Iran, broader JCPOA plus of sorts. And I think what people here in the foreign ministry, also the chancellery, value about the Biden administration already is that they start talking with partners in Europe early on, and they try to find a common approach. That's nice to have after 4 years of entirely different policy and diplomacy, I think. And now I get to the priorities that are less popular in Germany, but they should be, or they are European priorities. It would be Russia policy and China policy or strategy towards China. I think the German government is, you know, it is very undecided at this point, or at least everyone else maybe coming after Angela Merkel is very undecided on key issues like Nord Stream 2, or whether we allow Chinese companies on European markets when on German markets as well, when we talk about 5G networks and so on. But in general, I think there's an interest in having some kind of a common or coordinated approach at least. So for the US and the EU, both sides would be better off if we work together on these topics. And to wrap up, to answer your question, yes, it could be a momentum for renewed transatlantic cooperation because you have common interests, you have a great lineup in the Biden administration, very smart people. And also, yeah, if you look at programs and sort of the theory behind Biden's foreign policy, I think there's a great amount of overlap with European values for sure, and also common ideas about how to approach crisis and urgent problems. And I stop here. I look very much forward to the discussion.
Many thanks, Célia and Laura. So you touched on many topics, and this was quite a very broad presentation in little time. So well done for that. So let me pick on one point that you both mentioned, which echo kind of this narrative of America is back, but who knows if we can trust them again? They might be reversing decision again, etc., which is climate. So one of the first action that Joe Biden took when he came to office was to rejoin the Paris Agreement. So what do you make of that? Will they stay in? Can we trust them? And what? Yeah, and without reading the future, what do you make of these decisions and of the future of climate change internationally? And maybe just one or two words on the domestic aspect as well. And I'll start with Célia.
Thank you, Céline. Yes, I can. Following up on Laura, it could seem that maybe as a French woman, I get to be more cynical, and maybe as a German woman, you get to reflect more of the, the hopeful spirit that you still believe in the core of American liberalism, American, force for good in the world, which they are sometimes capable of, and we tend to sit on the cynical line or skeptical side, let's say. On climate, though, what's happening in the US is extremely interesting. And it's extremely interesting because it's one of these international topics of high priority domestically. Why? Because climate and climate justice in particular was at the heart of the mobilization that took Joe Biden back in power. Not only Joe Biden, but the entire democratic mobilization that started in the midterms of 2018, the sort of first big election in the after 2016 era, where after this, the retaking of the House of Representatives by the Democrats, you've seen in 2019, 2020, a lot of ideas around big activist-based, youth-led climate movement. And this means, and in particular with a racial justice component. And this means that when Joe Biden comes in and has his own pro-climate portfolio, he's actually pandering to his electoral base, or even to the base that is to the left of his own, and therefore a base that he has to work with and that he has to appease or just work for. And this helps a lot then when he has to make international climate decisions, because it's both good politics and good policy. At least that's how that's the alignment we are in today. And so what we've seen is that immediately from the get-go, from the first nominations, you can see that this new administration has a whole of government strategy. So it's, as Laura said, it's the special envoy, John Kerry, that has been nominated at the highest level of government, plus Gina McCarthy for the domestic side, together with a whole array of new climate position in all the departments. It's also the head of main departments such as Janet Yellen at Treasury, Pete Buttigieg in transportation, Merrick Garland, Attorney General. All of them during their hearing for nomination mentioned climate justice or climate finance for Janet Yellen, or adaptation to climate goals for the Secretary of Transportation. And that's exactly what you want to see, because it's not enough to rejoin Paris. You have to rejoin Paris, and then you have to submit a new nationally determined contribution, a new NDC that's going to come up ahead of the COP26 in Glasgow. And this will probably reflect a consultation with every sector of the economy, so that this contribution is credible and strong enough to reassure international partners. And last point, we also see the nomination of Michael Regan at the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, that has been really undercut by the previous administration. He's a former Attorney General of South Carolina, I think, African-American himself, who comes in to the job with a strong racial justice agenda. So basically thinking that environmental justice is at the heart of the racial justice question, and therefore should be fully addressed also within American institutions. For all of these reasons, there's a good argument to be made that not only is the climate policy very, very sustainable over the 4 years of Joe Biden, but also will probably have consequences in terms of regulations, in terms of policy that are long lasting, because once you've moved, to an all electric mobility system, you don't go back. Once you've transformed finance to encompass much more green finance, you don't turn the tide. So it's one of these elements that's actually fairly exciting to see develop.
Thank you so much. Laura, do you want to complement this broad perspective? And I really like how you articulated the big picture and also how does it translate concretely? Because we know that very well. I mean, even in our own experience in Europe, if you really want to drive the transformation, it's not just nice promises and nice speeches. It's really how does it trickle down in all of the sectors? So this all of government approach that we've seen the Biden administration take is quite a nice example, I think. I mean, we'll see how it delivers, but in terms of model, at least it's quite inspiring. Laura, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. As Célia already said, it's not enough to rejoin Paris. Obviously not. At this point, actually, if it wasn't for the pandemic, both the US and my home country, Germany, wouldn't have met the self-defined national targets for the year 2020. And the US is, at this point, doesn't look like it's going to achieve its own 2025 NDC target. So there needs something needs to be done. But there are some hopeful signs again. For example, in January, I think late January, Joe Biden established an interagency working group on the social cost of greenhouse gases. And that is a very crucial step, because what this group is supposed to do, or to come up with, ideally, is to develop an estimate for the dollar cost of carbon pollution to society, which would be the fundamental thing you have to do if you then consider next steps, taxation, or even something like a border adjustment and so on. You need a carbon tax price, that everyone has to accept, or that you can actually trade with or work with. Also, another positive sign, already policy implementation, or a step towards implementing climate policy, I would say, is the president's trade agenda that just came out at the beginning of the week. That mentions that the US is willing to explore a carbon border adjustment mechanism. It's not very concrete yet. The designated USTR, Catherine Tai, also mentioned that at her Senate meeting. At least, that's an entirely new ball game that we're talking about now. If you compare this to a year back, right? Even you have a new administration that is not just talking, but it's already taking steps to taking key decisions. So there, as I think there are some estimates by various institutions. One of them, the Asia Society Policy Institute, in November last year, came out with an estimate that roughly 50% of what is needed to implement Biden's climate plan and clean energy path could be done by executive action through the agencies, through presidential decrees, and so on. And then you have the other half, of course, which is important. And there you need the 60 votes in the Senate. So if Biden gets stuck there, there are still other options. I mean, he has some options. So you can look at the subnational level. There's actually an interesting Brookings report on looking at cities. And it comes to the conclusion that 45 of the 100 largest US cities have already established greenhouse gas reduction plans. That's, you know, that's at least a step forward. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. Obviously, some of those cities are lagging behind with their own targets, but you know, there's hope. And then one final point on climate policy. There's also another option, which would be to push climate policy through large-scale investment programs. And here you need the interplay of Treasury and the Fed, right? So if you continued programs that were just explored last year during the pandemic, like the municipal liquidity facility, the Main Street lending programs of that sort, you could use that money to expand public and private investment in green infrastructure and research and development and so on. And that would probably change the future of the United States in terms of climate policy, would entirely change that. But you needed to be willing to spend that money, and you also need the very close cooperation between Treasury and the Fed.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Celia. Thanks a lot, Laura, for your views on cooperation or a joint kind of effort to implement the Paris Agreement by the United States and France and Germany. At this point of time, I would like to open the debate really to questions already from the floor, from everybody who has joined us. You have got two options. You can either ask the questions in the chat. There is a specific Q&A, questions and answer section. You can also write it in the chat directly, or you can also raise your hand and ask the question orally, and we're going to give you the right to speak. Don't hesitate to do this. As the questions come in, we will give you the floor or read the questions out loud to our experts. I see that Renaud Maloberti has already raised a hand right from the beginning, so this must have been a very instant and maybe emotional question. Renaud, I'm going to give you the right to speak. Maybe you want to ask your question. Please be short if possible. Thank you very much. I see that somehow it's not properly working because it tells me I want to unmute Renaud, but it doesn't work. Renaud, you can unmute yourself now. Okay, this doesn't work properly. It has been worth a try. Apologies for that. Then in this case, if there are others, please raise your hand. And Renaud, for you, maybe don't hesitate to ask your question in the chat, and we're going to read it out loud. But before, oh, there's the first question coming in faster than I thought. Okay, there's a question that we had almost, and I have to say something here. We've made few bets before. We had a discussion about a week or two ago, a nice discussion with Laura and Célia, and we made a few bets on which questions will definitely appear. And Laura, there is the question that you had bet on. The question on the impact of Nord Stream 2 on the relationship between the United States and Germany. What's your view on this? Can the German government ignore the impacts or the repercussions of this big infrastructure project any longer, or is it something that can be dealt with kind of in some kind of don't ask, don't tell way?
Okay, thanks for the question. I was somewhat prepared for that. So I think just to say that out front, at my institute, a number of colleagues and I, we published a paper when Biden won the election, and we recommended that there should be something like a moratorium. So stop of the building process, giving the government time or giving the EU time to explore sort of the US view on things and talk about sanctions and everything that's related to the whole Nord Stream building process. But you might argue, and some of my colleagues in Germany have done that a moratorium is only kicking the can down the road. It's not really a solution. Obviously, it's not. I hear some.
There's some family action there, in your home.
Yeah, I have some in my background as well. So moratorium is no permanent solution, of course. I'd say it's a bad idea for Germany to continue the project. It's not even about whether we should have a gas pipeline project with Russia or not. It's for me, it's a question of sort of diplomatic or political skill, foreign policy skill. Unless you have enough support from your other European family members, it's probably not a wise foreign policy decision to continue working on this and do everything to have this project finished and tell people that it's merely an economic policy issue and that there wouldn't be any political repercussions of this economic project. So I think it's bad policy. And one thing's for sure, Germany doesn't have the support of key European players. I never really had the sense that the French were supporting Merkel's position on that. And that would be key. And then you probably, as the German government, you would like your Polish neighbors and everyone else in your neighborhood to somewhat agree with you on a key project like that. And they all don't. So therefore, I think even if it's not a principled decision, it's a rational decision to drop the project, I think.
Thanks a lot for your insights. Then maybe quickly over to you, Célia. What do the French think about Nord Stream 2?
So I wouldn't dare really answering that question because I don't know. I can bet you that and the reason I don't know is that it's not very talked about in French circles, actually. It's one of these issues that I think there's a sort of respect for whatever will be the German decision. So you will hear a few think tankers here and there, depending on their proximity to the US or to Germany, express more or less support, very often, very few support actually for the project. But the French government on that issue will also consider that it's probably a mistake. But they are having their own, pet project with Russia at the moment, where President Macron has been defending the idea of a dialogue with Russia, something that is quite unpopular at the moment in Europe. And his argument is to say that if Russia is their biggest neighbors, it's right there on the side of Europe. You need to build a stronger security architecture for Europe, and therefore you cannot entirely turn your back and behave like complete competitors and rivals with Russia. You have to find a way to have a dialogue. I must say this position has been quite controversial. It's including in French diplomatic circles. So far, the results have been disappointing. Even President Macron himself acknowledged that the results of the dialogue have been disappointing. But I would imagine that, all of these difficult Russia questions, the French instinct would be that they wouldn't want these to be determined by the American perspective only, and that they would respect a form of either European consensus emerging on either Nord Stream 2 or other elements dealing with Russia, and not having it dominating by the Russian-American competition.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Célia. Thanks a lot, Laura. I would have another question, a follow-up question on a topic that you have raised earlier already, and the topic that is basically overarching here and having repercussions on all the topics that we've discussed so far. Of course, it's the Corona pandemic, it's COVID-19. And from a personal experience, I must say that about 6-8 months ago, I was in the situation where I had to decide whether I go back to the United States or stay here in Europe. The decision was pretty easy, not only because of my family and so on, but the decision was pretty easy. Europe, at least especially Germany, was doing pretty well in terms of getting COVID under control. And the United States were struggling tremendously with any approach to fighting the pandemic. Now, 6 months later, the situation seems quite different. And I'm personally wondering, in order to be on the safe side from a public health perspective, wouldn't it be better to go to the United States and leave Europe, where things are not really improving? And there's also one feeling that that I have just from reading the media, where in the United States it seems like there is a kind of really, yes, we can do it. Things are going in the right direction. Things are getting better. Compared to a feeling here in Europe, or at least I can only speak from the German perspective, or mainly from the German perspective, where things are going a little bit sideways, and things are definitely not improving significantly. They're also not totally deteriorating, but it's not, there's not this US-American feeling that I can read between the lines, where it's really kind of, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm wondering, two quick questions here. One question is, what can we learn here in Europe from the United States and how they have tackled COVID-19? And the second question, how do you see a cooperation between the United States, Europe, especially France and Germany, also in making sure that other countries that don't have the means, that don't have the money, that don't have the capacities to pull off such vaccination campaigns as they are possible in developed countries, will be possible in the developing world. Maybe we start with you, Célia.
Sure, Dominique. I'm not sure. So where did you end up? What did you decide?
I'm a lazy person, so I'm still in Europe, still in Germany.
All right. Well, we have all faced, all of us European expatriates have all faced this type of decision. We've seen some of our friends go back because they felt that they would be better and safer at home, and also for many different reasons. And those of us who stayed, and I stayed because I have a job, I have my kids here, I have all my life here, and I didn't want, also I did not have that many options back home. One of the reality, and it gets a bit personal here, but I want to mention it because I think it's an overlooming issue as well. And to answer you, we are all under travel ban. And you have to remember that only binationals or people holding green cards are able to go back and forth. And at the moment, not even French nationals are not even allowed to go back to their own country. But we've been under travel ban for many of us who are visa holders for months and for a year now. And with absolutely no sign of it getting better. Actually, the signs are getting worse. There's a bunch of new presidential decision that seems to restrict even more the possibility of people traveling back home and coming back to work in the US where they have a permission to work. This is a long-term issue that very few people talk about, because considering the size of the crisis, the gravity of the crisis, it seems very, very little and concerning only very few people. It's actually quite a lot of people who are contributing to creating this sort of network of relationship that on which the transatlantic relation is based and has been based for since the beginning of the creation of the United States. You have to remember that, you know, French people came and help out to make America independent and the great country that it is. The need for us to be living on both sides of the Atlantic and not just to meet by Zoom is fundamental. It's fundamental to the connection and the relationship. And if we that should be actually a priority, and I'm not just lobbying or advocating for myself, but it should be part of the conversation. As far as what you've asked on the sort of difference of approach, it's quite interesting. It's been a roller coaster to see how sometimes the crisis felt much worse in Europe and much better in the US, and then vice versa. It seemed much darker in the US and then much better in Europe, and it changes all the time. I wouldn't make big conclusion. This has been a roller coaster of emotions for all of us. It depends on a day-to-day basis. Remember, last fall was a very intense and negative political season in the US. It was very heavy for all of us, this tension. And now Europe, at least its two main big countries, Germany and then France, will enter this political season in which, you know, everybody will rip each other apart. This is going to create some tension. And of course, the question of how to deal with the COVID crisis will be at the heart of it. So it might seem darker in Europe, and the vaccine rollout is slower at the moment, etc. My last point is just a little bit of a cultural element. Yes, there is we can do it culture here in the US, that when it can be expressed, when it's not, you know, tempered down by a toxic political atmosphere, is quite fascinating. A lot of us are living here and appreciating this. So yes, we can do it and have a vaccine. And yes, we can do it and come out stronger on the other side. This is very clear in some of Biden's speeches at the moment. But we know that the road is tough ahead also for Americans. And it's all of it is far from resolved. What we should be doing is sticking with each other in solidarity, together first, but also for the rest of the world. And that comes to the question of vaccinating the rest of the world. The US has pledged billions, now 4 billion, I think, to COVAX, the vaccine initiative that has been co-created between WHO, UN, and also Gates Foundation and others, in order to help developing countries access the vaccine. This is a major humanitarian endeavor that we should all get on board, and that could be a sort of a very positive element for our future together.
Excellent. No, thanks a lot, Célia. And it's also this, yes, we can, this can do attitude that I really count on in terms of climate change. One day when people really have will have understood that it's not a nice to have thing, but it's a survival necessity. Laura, what's your view on competition or cooperation between the United States and Europe with regard to COVID?
Well, first of all, I would I definitely agree with everything Célia said about the culture in the US, which is more prone to just get the task done and get through with a huge vaccination campaign. I think quick vaccination is probably the key. That's why it's working well in the US, in Israel, in the UK better now than the rest of Europe. And why is that possible? Because governments make better use of the existing doses. In Germany, we're always very cost focused. We have this austerity tradition, and somehow it seems to apply also to doses of a very crucial vaccine. And I find this troubling, I have to say. But nevertheless, there's something to learn. I think not only in the US and all Anglo-Saxon countries, you have a strong culture of mass vaccination campaigns. You had that after the Second World War. Actually, us Germans, we benefited hugely from that. The generation of my parents did. That saved many children's lives. And somehow in Anglo-Saxon countries, people seem to be more comfortable with a strong state in the area of vaccination. Not in general, obviously, but in that particular area of public health. There is a strong tradition, and we could learn from that also on a global scale. So it would make sense to work together, definitely, because as Célia already said, there's no end to the pandemic unless all countries receive the vaccines. And yeah, we have to work on this. Again, there's some hopeful signs, I think, in the US political system now. It's something seems to be working now that didn't work before. There is bipartisan support of COVAX, and it was based on a bipartisan congressional vote last year that the money was appropriated, the 4 billion that Célia mentioned, was appropriated to the COVAX initiative. So both parties, you have rational thinkers, science-based decision-making on both ends of the political spectrum. That's good news, I think. We could see more of that, or could use more of that.
Okay, thank you. And going now to the questions we're receiving from our audience. And if you're on Facebook, we'll try to check there as well in case there are questions, but we're getting them on Zoom for now. So a question that's de facto related to COVID, but I think much broader than that, is the question of the role of China in this transatlantic relationship. Do you see it as Europe and US collaborating on China? Do you see it as a competitive relationship? And there is also a question on IP in this context. So I'll let you answer that. Maybe this time we start with Laura and then we go to Célia. Go ahead, Laura.
Working together on China is the question. Broadly, yes, there are many fields in which that would make sense. In particular, I think in the defense and security policy domain. I think it would also make a lot of sense in the economic domain. But here I'm sort of split if I had to say, if I had to report a European view on things, because apparently my government takes an entirely different position, or in certain fields at least, from everyone else in Europe, at least from the bigger players. So we diverge. And there's one thing I might say about this. I think with the end of the Merkel era, which is nearing, we have elections, general elections in September. You will see a change in German policy towards China. It will be less friendly, I think, if you look at the key political players. It will be much more confrontational, I think, and that will shift the position of the EU, because so far Germany was more of a veto player, I think, when we get to anything from investment screening, 5G networks, yeah, and even policy within the WTO, where Germany tended to be much more China-friendly, or allowing them more room than other countries are comfortable with in the EU. So that's one prediction I would make. There will be a change in the German stance, and that will change the balance. But probably there will never be a complete overlap of transatlantic approaches towards China. And that's something I think the Biden administration is already acknowledging. If you listen to Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken, you hear them say this. They don't ask for a complete 100% match of policies. It's no longer a discussion about perfect decoupling, but we're looking for common areas where we can work together.
Thanks a lot, Laura. Over to you, Célia. So is it really kind of for Europe and the US just trying to find the best individual deal with regard to China? Or is it really to shape and elaborate and develop a common position in order to be able to bargain jointly towards this emerging giant?
So it's not going to be it's not going to be a common position on every topic. It would be cumbersome, useless, and impractical to imagine that we would agree with the United States on everything from trade, to security, to space, to technology, to any other topic. And one of the reasons is that the analysis that is growing in the United States with regard to China is an analysis of competition in all sectors. While on the European front, the official position of the European Union at the moment is that China is both a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. So it's all three dimensions. And of course, the French that are a little bit more hawkish on China sometimes consider that, for example, the Germans tend to forget a little bit about the systemic rivalry, but it's not entirely true. And as Laura pointed out, it's also a generational question or political generation question that other more leaders that might be more skeptical of China might get in power soon. But in both cases, whether it's France or whether it's Germany, it's a position that considers that this growing dual competition between China and the United States should not be the only framework through which we would consider our own relationship with China. It shouldn't be the case that we are refrained in engaging with China on many front of direct interest. And you could see that with the investment treaty that has been announced by Merkel in December, much to the sort of disappointment of the American administration. However, the American administration, the Biden administration that was coming in, considered there was no material there for really having an enormous clash with European partners. So, and there's a sort of sophisticated understanding that the Europeans will have their own relationship to China and that they cannot control all of it. So what we see emanating from the Biden administration is a focus on two areas. First, a focus on alliances, and mostly Asian alliances. If European alliances are not as strong on China, maybe Asian alliances will. And you see the appointment of a coordinator for the Indo-Pacific at the National Security Council, Kurt Campbell, who will work with Southeast Asia, with Australia, with India, with Japan, but also with European partners in order to create a sort of understanding of some of the security challenges that China poses, and at least having this conversation of between allies. And the second element is the focus on technology in particular. And you see that with the appointment of a new deputy assistant secretary, deputy national security advisor on cyber and technology, with the appointment of China directors that know very well the technology front, because the technology and artificial intelligence front is probably the area on which, if the US wants to apply any pressure on Europeans, it might be on this question. Basically considering that, you know, they're not going to fight all fronts, but if the US and Europe was able to come on to an understanding on what should be the rules of the game on the technology front, to put together norms and standards, this will have enormous repercussion in its competition with China. So I will imagine that that will be the primary focus in years to come.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. There is another question that has been posted in the chat, and that is about the idea of when you enhance a relationship and you make a relationship closer between two partners. In this case, the specific reference is between France and Germany and the EU, but we can also transfer it to the relationship between France, Germany, and the United States. Of course, an exclusive relationship also creates outsiders and people that are not part of this relationship. Do you see any risk there for creating any outsiders, any countries that may get the feeling of being second best for these three players? Laura, you want to start?
I have to apologize, but can you Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on the question? I'm not sure I got it right. So who would be the if we see outsiders from a closer relationship, transatlantic relationship, or because you were talking about triangular?
Exactly. The idea is the original question was on the deep integration that we see between France and Germany.
Yeah.
And then when you have got a really close relationship between France and Germany, and both are partners, or both are members of the European Union, of course, then you've got some countries in the European Union that are not in this kind of very close relationship. And I wanted to lift this idea, translate to the concept of the transatlantic cooperation. When you have now a closer relationship, a closer cooperation between France, Germany, and the United States, this exclusive club may it create kind of outsiders. I'm thinking, for example, like Canada, the United Kingdom, and so on, that would actually also like to be part of such a close relationship, and that may now feel second best. But maybe I'm also just too paranoid here in terms of political sensitivities.
It's always good to be paranoid about sensibility among European countries, I think. So if you have a closer relationship between French and German governments, of course, in Eastern European countries are usually getting nervous. So with this new situation with the United Kingdom out with the Brexit out of the EU, you could imagine that there was a worry they have, but I think they were already pretty quick on acting on that. They already came up with strategy papers, also took action. I mean, the whole G7 virtual meeting a couple of weeks ago was more or less one message. We have a special relationship with the US and we will keep it, and we will do everything to keep it. And you can rely on us. And by the way, there's just one phone you have to call, not like the proverbial saying, the Kissinger's proverbial saying about not knowing where to call, which phone to call. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think if there are world regions who could be excluded, but they generally tend to be excluded, unfortunately, it's regions like Latin America and Africa. They have any reason to be worried, I think. Not so much Asia, because we have this continued pivot to Asia. I think we will see more of that on the US side. And also within Europe, even in Germany, foreign policy people are realizing that we need to engage more with that region. So I think there would be more inclusion rather than exclusion.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Laura. I see that Andre is raising his hand, and most likely he's going to criticize me and correct me because I may have totally misinterpreted his question. Andrew, so please, you've got the possibility to speak. Please blame me for anything that I might have gotten wrong here.
No worries. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. Dominic, all good. Yeah, no, that was part of my question. Great conversation, by the way. Thank you. Yeah, no, I would like to bring it down to on a people base, and saying, okay, here inside the European Union, we have the benefits of being inside the European Union, and I would like to know if there's something like detailed projects we can work on to get closer to people in the US, because to be honest, without the United States, nothing can be achieved globally. And it is not only the governmental level, it has to be on a lower level as well. And because the situation is everybody's struggling a bit, are there any ideas, any projects in sight that we can work on and that could bring us a bit closer together to face the challenges environmentally? We spoke about that, socially, and also security issues, that we can find solutions together. And I would like to bring it to level it down on the citizen base, like taxation, for instance, or tech trade, like the COVID situation. You know, we have the European Union gave a lot of money for research in advance. So the little tech labs had been able to pre-produce ideas how to deal with pandemics like the COVID situation. So they have been able to build it up in advance. And now we all face the problem that the vaccine is limited, highly limited, and the companies are trying to benefit from it financially. Is there anything we can do together to help out the citizens, help out the countries that cannot afford those high prices, and so on. So I would like to make it broad. I don't mind who would like to answer on it, but I would really be interested in, are there any projects, like TTIP or something alike, where we can see progress for the relationship between the US citizens and citizens in the EU, for example. Thank you.
Célia, I see that you are smiling and that you want to say something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I concerning the relationship between American citizens and EU citizens, I was just thinking, well, let's fix the travel ban and let's visit each other first. I'll go back to that again as a first step to have actual interactions outside of this Zoom format. I think there's a lot of things that Andre brought with his question, and one of them was the idea of when we have closer European integration, does it mean that the outside world, outside of Europe, outside of the EU, gets further because we spend so much time coming to a common position, but also understanding each other, or just living in each other's countries through the Erasmus program and so many other fantastic ways we can live together in the EU? Does that create actually a stronger border with the rest? And the case in point being Brexit, the future of EU-UK relations for years to come will be at the heart of knowing whether the EU is capable, while getting stronger, to have healthy, close relationship with a country such as the UK, when we know that there's, it's been a tough 4 years of Brexit. There's a lot of resentment on both parts. There's a lot of unsettled questions. And I'm afraid that this sort of extraction will create even more distance, and sometimes even more distance than from the US, because there's a sort of, the feeling that we've been abandoned on one side and rejected, and the feeling that you made it really tough on the other side. This should be, solving our relationship to the UK should be a priority. It will also help our relationship with the US. I think this triangle is absolutely key. And the fact is that the feeling of a border and the return of a border outside of the EU is not just on the outside. You have a nationalistic, populist challenge from the inside. And so to respond to this nationalistic element, you also have to make it work and to show that the EU works for its own people and then work in cooperation with the UK, with the US. In terms of big project that could bring us together, not only with the US, but also with the UK, I think one of the top challenges, and we talked about it with the China challenge earlier, the question of the influence and role of digital giants in our everyday life is key. There's just simply not enough yet regulations, decisions, and the EU has advanced very rapidly on this front with the Digital Services Act. There's some deep irritants and some deep disagreements on both sides of the Atlantic. But the idea is that we have to find a sustainable and common way to have, in particular, American digital giants, way to participate economically in our life. So basically it's fixing taxation. How do you tax the big tech companies? What sort of privacy and data flow type of rules do we have? Do we have them now in the EU, but can we harmonize them across the Atlantic? And the last point is also the question of extremism on social media platforms and all the other technological disruption that can be brought by these giants. Can we find an understanding to see that it's on both sides' interest to find a common understanding of what the role that these big tech giants should play in our everyday life? I think that's a tough project, but that's one that can really bring us together if we're able to find the remedy.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Célia. I like the way how you've basically defined the homework for Biden, Macron, and whoever is going to be the German Chancellor for the coming years. Thanks a lot. Laura, your view?
I agree. Again, I perfectly agree. I think there's one area where cooperation between the US, UK, and EU could really help the world tackle the health crisis, the pandemic. And you know, there was a tradition. There was a time when the American CDC was quintessential to ending epidemics in countries, and we haven't seen much of that in this pandemic. Obviously, there's a home first approach. You need to take care of the crisis in your own country first and serve your own citizens. But I would really appreciate an initiative of the CDC together with the Europeans, and obviously also the Brits. The UK should be in to help other countries to roll out vaccines, but also, you know, take all the necessary steps to prevent the next epidemic. And that would really be an area of solidarity, which is also completely rational because it suits our own interests. So it would be the ideal policy. And I think that would be a task, a homework for the transatlantic UK triangle that they should work, that leaders should be working on at this point.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll have to stop here because we're already reaching the end of our discussion. Thank you so much. This was very interesting. We won't have time to go through all of the questions, but I think for the vaccination, you just heard some answers maybe that can inform the discussion. I'm not sure we can get too much in details on the UK case. For the discussion on the college students regarding groups, I mean, there is a lot happening in the US right now with the Sunrise movement. They are building connection with European networks, so I invite you to check them out or send us an email. I'm happy also to connect you with more groups if that's helpful. And how to confirm that the US is really back in the Paris Agreement. Well, maybe that can be the theme for another webinar in 1 year or so to see where we are. But I think the comments from Célia early on to say, let's see what happens domestically, how much is trickled down sectorally in the US as a sign of the seriousness of the transformation domestically that will deliver serious results for the Paris Agreement is probably the best proof of all that. But we probably need some time to judge. For now, we don't have more time. So let me stop here, hand over to Dominic, and thank again the German Green Party, our speakers, and all our attendees for today's event. And we'll organize more in the future, so stay tuned and don't forget to register if you want to vote in the French election this year, if you're listening and you're French. Over to you, Dominic. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Céline. Also, big thank you from my side on behalf of the German Green Party to the French Greens for this very fruitful and enjoyable cooperation. And a huge thank you to you, Laura, to you, Célia, really for having shared your scarce time, for your extensive expertise, and for having shared also your wonderful personalities. It has been a real pleasure to organize and to conduct this webinar with you. It would be great to welcome you again one day. Usually we now give physically we now give small green souvenirs to our speakers. I will make sure that you get them either by mail or somebody's going to drop them at your doorstep in the coming weeks. A very quick announcement just now for the German Greens, but also for the French Greens that are willing to learn German until May. On May 7th, we're gonna welcome Cem Özdemir, a quite well-known Green politician in Germany, on our virtual Green sofa. So stay tuned, look forward to that event. And any French Greens who want to join will be very welcome to be there. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, have a wonderful evening, and see you soon again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.